Hey everyone, I just wanted to do a video on this article called Stephen Hawking, the renowned physicist, has declared that philosophy is dead. And I wanted to do this video for a long time because although this article's from 2011, I've kind of been writing this particular piece for a long time, and I really wanted to get these ideas out there because I feel like it's really relevant to today's discussions globally and locally about ethics and morals and value systems, and that is clearly the purview of philosophers. So I wanted to begin with a quote from an article, which I will provide sources for, speaking about Stephen Hawking and quoting him on this issue. So Stephen Hawking, speaking to Google's Zeitgeist conference in Hertfordshire, the author of A Brief History of Time, said that fundamental questions about the nature of the universe could not be resolved without hard data, such as that currently being derived from the Large Hadron Collider and space research. Most of us don't worry about these questions most of the time, but almost all of us sometimes wonder, why are we here? Where do we come from? Traditionally, these are questions for philosophy, but philosophy is dead, he said. Philosophers have not kept up with modern developments in science, particularly physics. Professor Hawking went on to claim that scientists have become the bearers of the torches of discovery in our quest for knowledge. He said that new theories lead us to a new way and very different picture of what the universe has and our place in it. So I think what he's referring to is kind of the fact that scientists have taken over, and philosophers kind of, although we do have a place still, a very small and disrespected place in society, we definitely all of our jobs and all of our opportunities have been outsourced to different groups. So instead of the philosopher, now you have the psychologist, now you have this counselor, the social worker, the advice giver, any of these people that would previously, advisory capacity for almost anything, business, personal, whatever. And obviously there's religious leaders and other things and people that develop ideas, but these obviously jobs have been outsourced and put into different areas. So the philosophers themselves have been kind of have lost a lot of their former glory that they once had, and I do agree with him to a certain degree that science has failed. That philosophy has failed to come up with the same level of speed of at discovering and accumulating more new knowledge, but I don't think that what he's saying comes across as the most in-depth analysis of philosophy, and I don't really understand how he could say that. So instead of going into this and going with my own opinion, I want to provide a little bit of context before I do that. And this is from another documentary or another debate that was placed online called Stephen Hawking versus Philosophy. Has Science Killed Philosophy? By the Institute of Art and Ideas. And this is between Lewis Wolpert, the scientist, and Stephen Fuller, the philosopher. And he's also a sociologist professor. And so I think that this, even though this video was actually removed off YouTube, I'll provide a link for it, but I'm just telling you that it's been removed for some reason, and I've had trouble finding this footage. So luckily for me, I wrote out some summary of the debate and some of the topics that I found that would be the most interesting or important to bring up in this topic when dealing with the issue of the conflict between science and philosophy. So first, the scientist declares, Lewis Wolpert, science is about developing understandings. And then, what are the ethical implications of a scientific process, and are those philosophical questions? So I guess what they're getting at and what they're arguing about at the beginning is the difference between philosophy and science. Philosophy is clearly ideas, and science is more dealing with concrete facts and experiments and things that can be reproduced and falsifiable and can be predictable and used to develop methods and models in order to find out how the world works. And that doesn't necessarily tell us what we should do with that information. So I think that although there is a certain amount of overlap and intersectionality between the two Venn diagrams that are philosophy and science, I think that there is a certain amount that philosophy needs science and science needs philosophy in this way, in an almost symbiotic relationship. I don't think that one can exist in a vacuum or void without the other. So I have a problem with this. But they continue, and the scientist asks, do you think science makes progress? Because he believes that science is appealing to esoteric knowledge and supernatural things. So in that sense, I think he's referring to a large group of philosophers, more Platonic individuals, people who would subscribe to ideas that maybe sophists, anyone who isn't a rationalist. I guess there's a lot of philosophers that have different spheres of knowledge and ideas, and they're not necessarily even schools of thought, and they're not all the same. So although you may find a lot of philosophers I disagree with, I think that there is something to say about this idea that this painting with a broad brush, the idea that all philosophers are appealing to esoteric knowledge and supernatural things. No, that's just blatantly false. That's not what all philosophers do, and I don't even know where he got that from. So Steve Fuller comes back at him with this and says, well, philosophy is actually a clarifier rather than an explainer. Philosophy of science is the foundation of good science. So he's coming from a sociological perspective, and he's saying that the study of science, or the philosophy of science, i.e. the scientific method, and making sure that people are following these methods and that they're not allowing things to ruin their process or their experiments or their results, and that is important. And it seems to be odd that the scientists in this particular debate, although he is arguing in favor of Stephen Hawking's proposal, he actually declares that he still responds and says that science is ethics free. Ethics free. I don't really know what he means by that. I think he means that that science, and that's not what Stephen Hawking is saying either. He's going even further. He's saying that science is literally deals with just the accumulation of knowledge and facts, and it has almost no principles or ethics associated with it. And I mean, I see what he's saying, but I think that that's kind of divorcing itself from reality to a certain degree in order to just be like, oh, that's not philosophy. Well, ethics is philosophy. Value systems are philosophy. You engage in it when you do ethics. So it's kind of, once again, I don't know if we can really divorce these two topics from each other successfully without doing a significant amount of mental gymnastics. So how do you tell the difference between good and bad science? That's kind of the basis for this. How do you know the difference between someone curing cancer or attempting to, or doing cancer research in general, oncologists, and Nazis? I mean, I don't mean this in the social justice warrior, everybody is a Nazi who doesn't agree with me. I mean this in the literal SS Germany 1944 people doing heinous experiments and horrible experiments. Where was the ethics there? That was ethics free, or not even ethics free, there was still ethics there. They were still saying, these are our standards, this is our principles. And they may have been very low standards, but an extremely reprehensible lack of consideration for human rights for other humans. But you can't say that they were somehow not engaged in principles and value systems in philosophical discourse. The Nazis had a philosophy. Nazism was a philosophy. It is something that needs to be fought and destroyed. It's not something that doesn't exist, as if science is somehow ethics free and total is kind of ridiculous. And I hope you guys kind of see where I'm going with this. But the scientific method was meant as an ethics of scientific content. Epistemic virtues is the ethics of science. So epistemology is the theory of knowledge, is how do we know what we know. So in a scientific context, especially considering the scientific method, it revolves around the idea that you do have a set of principles and criteria that you are applying and that you need to apply in order for what you're doing to be considered science, or at least good science. So, and for other people to not condemn you for moving against whatever social or moral codes that they have put in place, whether right or wrong. There are codes and there are standards by which scientists do conform to in order to participate in global discussions without doing it in secret and not being able to allow other people to know what you're doing. I'm not saying that there aren't scientists that are unethical. I'm saying that if you want to be if you are not ethical and you expose yourself to the public and using that information and revealing that you're being unethical in your studies, I think you'd have a huge problem just substantiating your work in general because of your lack of appeal to the scientific method and your lack of appeal to some kind of ethics. You have to justify yourself rationally in some way. So Stephen Hawking's assertion is that philosophy is dead. And on the face of it, so this is my opinion now, I actually found that his assertion refutes itself, because he's doing philosophy when he's making that argument. So perhaps what he means to say is that metaphysics has not kept up with science, because philosophy is just like science. Science is not one field. It's multiple fields under the umbrella of the scientific method and rationalism, etc., Enlightenment theories and stuff like that. But I think that it definitely seems to me like he's mistaking philosophy for metaphysics, because metaphysics definitely appeals to esoteric, supernatural, unexplainable things that are empirically unprovable. And I agree with him in that sense. I engage in, I've taken courses at university for metaphysics. I love metaphysics. It's a great field. However, I agree with him that field really doesn't help people in general. I mean, unless you're talking about things that can and could be tested or put to some kind of use. I think that in a global sense, I think that it helps the human consciousness to discuss these ideas and the consciousness of ideas and spread them and diffuse them to the people. But in general, I don't think that metaphysics and philosophy should be conflated in such a way. I think he should have been much more specific about what areas he was talking about, because there are people like Stephen Fuller who are literally philosophers of science, and that's all they do. And I've taken courses like that, and I had a professor who was literally a philosopher of science, and that's what they do. They study the scientific method, and they, the surrounding faculties around that are not the same as them, and they are not the same as other philosophers who deal with things that are a lot more esoteric. So, asking a physicist to comment on whether philosophy is alive or dead is a bit like asking a philosopher for their opinion on M theory. So M theory is a theory in physics that unifies all consistent versions of superstring theory. The existence of such a theory was conjectured by Edward Witten at a string theory conference at the University of Southern California in the spring of 1995. Philosophers, I mean, I'm sure that my opinion is important to me and maybe some of my other friends, but it's not important to physicists. It's not important to people that actually have knowledge of this stuff. And that little blurb that I just read you is me researching it. I know nothing about this topic. So my opinion on M theory is just as worthless as people who have taken no time to separate out the difference between metaphysics, ethics, epistemology, etc. It's just lazy thinking and lazy arguing. I have to agree with the scientist in regard, and this is a little bit more evidence here. I have to agree with the scientist in regard that the fact that philosophy has made little progress in comparison to modern sciences, and has also failed to mount an effective defense against the sophists who have taken over the whole group and given us a horrible name, and starting with Plato, because his ideas really created a totalitarian utopia society in which people built upon that and have created almost mirror totalitarian societies trying to create them and create a utopia and based off his image. And that's a bad idea, because these utopian images usually have an authoritarian dictatorial system involved at the end or the middle or somewhere along the lines. It just happens. And seemingly unexplainable, because they're all so good-intentioned people, right? Because the road to hell is literally paved with good intentions. Alright, so, however, when everything else is taken into consideration, science is neither ethics-free nor is it completely dead. I think I can see that. I don't know. I want other people's opinion on this, so hopefully I can get some feedback on this. If you are judging philosophers by their ability to do science, or scientists by their ability to do philosophy, we're totally missing the point of the expertise and mastery of our specific fields. I'm not in any way attempting to minimize Hawking's achievements in the field of physics, and everyone is entitled to their own opinion, as well as I do concede that we as philosophers benefit from criticism and from the opinions in general of others, and of his especially, because he is Stephen Hawking, he's a genius, and we benefit from his opinions and his criticisms, and because he is such an eminent scientist. We benefit as modern-day defenders and preservers of philosophical knowledge and discourse to be challenged and motivated once again to engage with these critics. So unlike a lot of the other critics, the social justice, the left, the far right, a lot of the people that attack philosophers and philosophy in general, or just the layman, the person who says, why do I need to think about things in general? I just want to live, I don't want to think. That's fine, and it's up to you. You can do whatever you want. And, well, not whatever you want, there are some reasonable limits to doing whatever you want, but I think that it's necessary to reiterate the issue that if judging philosophers by their ability to do science, then I think that Stephen Hawking has demonstrated he is, I wouldn't say a bad philosopher, but he's proving that he has not really considered the difference between, like I said, philosophers of science like Steve Fuller at a university who studies the scientific method, and someone like Plato who, writes a book and declares himself that he declares that, people need to make up rumors and myths about people's souls being different metals in order to keep them in their place socially. So I think that's ridiculous. So ethics are necessary when pursuing scientific knowledge. This is something that is, I don't know how he can really argue against this. I don't know how anyone can argue against this because, and I would like to hear a counter argument because I've watched several debates. I listened to Stephen Hawking's entire interview, and he doesn't seem to make the case that Louis Wolpert is making, who is the scientist in the second debate, where he's saying science is ethics free. Stephen Hawking is not saying science is ethics free. He's saying that, which is obviously ethics is philosophy, and if anyone argues with that, I mean, I don't think that should be an argument. And it definitely, he's saying that, but Stephen Hawking's not putting that forward. He's just saying this philosophy has failed and science has taken up the torch. So I just wanted to share this comment because I've been reading a lot of videos, and I've been watching a lot of videos and reading a lot on this topic, and I found this really interesting comment from someone who I feel like this person obviously has interest in this topic as well, and he left a comment and also kind of a little memorial / respect, giving a little bit of paying respect to his old philosopher friend who passed away. So in honor of this man and in honor of other philosophers who have taken the time and put in the effort to respectfully engage with Stephen Hawking about these ideas over the last couple of years, I just wanted to share this with everyone. This comment is in the memory of an old philosopher friend of mine, Robert Wingard, who passed away too young several years ago. Robert Wingard was a philosophy of science and professor of philosophy at Rutgers University. He became a faculty member at Rutgers University and later joined the Department of Philosophy at Rutgers School of the Arts and Sciences in 1988. I too am a philosopher, except a PhD in sciences from MIT West. I generally agree with Hawking and Tyson. Their points are obvious. I would add that philosophy can find a just location in the areas of physics that lie just beyond the accepted areas of current knowledge. Of course, that is vague too, and raw material for further verbosity. Would you rather have a philosopher or physicist answer the question, am I worthwhile? And that's really the end of the discussion for me. Because I think that if I was going to ask someone, am I worthwhile? I mean, if I'm going to ask someone, what are the elemental, substances that my body is composed of, what periodic elements are part of my body, I'll ask a scientist. But in terms of philosophy and in terms of ethics, I don't think we should turn to scientists, and I don't think anyone has in terms of, there are some biological facts that we have to tackle and we have to deal with, but in terms of what we should be doing, I don't think that Stephen Hawking argued that science should be ethics-free or that it is, but he's moving in that direction where he's trying to say that philosophy is, or trying to limit philosophy kind of almost in the same way as between the theist and atheist debate, where there's the God of the gaps argument, where atheists will claim that, well, as science progresses and progresses, religion is pushed into the space, the space in between, the empty space in between, let's say, scientific knowledge and what we don't know yet. So, and that's where religion kind of festers and grows, and not always festers. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't want to come off like that. So there are some religions and some religious people who have contributed to science in huge ways, and humanity is better in some ways because of some aspects of religion. So, and the community it brings and stuff like that. But, however, the idea that Stephen Hawking can simply declare that all philosophy is dead, I think is wrong. I think that what he should have said is that, or what, I mean that's a little egotistical, but what I would have said if I was him is, I think that there is a need for philosophy because it acts as a watchman. It acts as the guard dog that really prevents, or supposed to, that's what we're here for. That's what me as a philosopher, that's what we're supposed to do, is to challenge people, to become the gadfly, to become the Athenian gadfly that Socrates was, to annoy people out of their complacency, to question them, just like Socrates did. What is virtue? What is the good? What is the bad? What is a life? What is all of these things? And if we don't have answers to these questions, like scientists, they want to know the answers to these questions. Now the question is, what questions should you ask first, in what order? I mean, what value system are you using to determine which questions need to be answered? And if they don't answer that, I guess they're just, a database of inanimate objects that a database that just acts as an inanimate object like a computer and just stores data and doesn't think about it and doesn't actually process the information that it's receiving. So I think that in general philosophy is necessary, and and science is not ethics free. Let's just get that straight. I don't know where he got that from, but I think he was just saying that to win an argument, and maybe that's why the YouTube page was removed. Their YouTube video was removed. Either way, it seems that, or it was privated, so it can't be viewed anymore. Either way, at the end of this, I think I just want to say that I think that philosophy does have a place in society, even though we've been marginalized and so many other people do our jobs better and not our jobs, but so many people have taken our occupation and done it in more scientifically or more modern ways that we were previously not capable of. So, but I think that there are a lot of issues, especially surrounding ethics, that are coming up right now. For example, I mean, there's obviously the Gamergate issue, but I think Gamergate really brought ethics in journalism to the forefront. And I know that's a joke or a meme or whatever, but it really did bring ethics in journalism to the forefront. And now ethics in journalism is a huge issue globally. Now everyone's questioning everything. What is fake news? What is this? What is that? So I think that in terms of whether or not philosophy still has a battle to fight, I think we still have many battles to fight and lose and win on both sides. So science has many more things to do, and philosophy has often played the role of the either the Batman to the Robin or the Robin to the Batman, which is science, and we've played along together for such a long time. And now I guess that since in the faculties, I guess in universities, it's becoming harder and harder to get funding for specific projects. So that's why certain people, let's say scientists or philosophers, would come out and attack other faculties to make them seem worthless or useless or any of those things in order to make sure that the funding gets to them instead of the other group. And I think public funding or private funding of research and education is one of the issues that drives it and that drives people's objectives. And I think this may potentially be one of those issues where this might actually be a faculty versus faculty fight, and it might not actually I mean, I don't know if Stephen Hawking is really concerned about philosophy, but I don't really know whether or not he actually believes the things that he's saying, or if he's saying it for his own benefit and for the benefit of other scientists who seek funding for their projects and who badly need them and deserve them, because scientists do amazing work. And I have a family that is engineers and scientists, and I look up to them a lot because they're the ones that build our world. But at the end of the day, if there aren't people, I mean, if there aren't philosophers willing to put themselves on the line and to say unpopular things and to question the status quo, we will be left with an Athens that simply deals with every disagreement with a sea of hemlock being poured on that person. And in terms of public opinion and being tried in the court of public opinion, we seem to do that quite a bit now. So whenever someone speaks out, they're crushed under the enormous weight of the ridiculous criticisms and vitriolic bile spewed by the social justice crowd. So I don't want to make this a political thing. This isn't about politics. This is about philosophy versus science. But at the end of the day, I think that they both serve purposes and they both are important. And that science without ethics becomes evil and questionable, and I don't really know what it would become without any kind of ethics. I don't even think that's possible not to have ethics. I mean, that's ridiculous to me. But I still think that science requires philosophy and philosophy requires science. Because without science, philosophers would have nothing to go on. We would have nothing to say. We would be still speaking like Empedocles and, Heraclitus about, although they were amazing philosophers for the ancient days, or Thales, who thought that the basic element that made up everything was water or fire or something like that. Like they were using all the knowledge and all the observable natural sciences and facts that they had available at the time. And that's what philosophers do. They take all the available evidence and put it together. So at the end of the day, that's what I feel is necessary for people to succeed and for society to move forward. We need kind of a mechanism to operate like philosophy does. And the fact that it's being removed and questioned and debilitated from questioning people should also be a subject of inquiry for everyone else. Well, I definitely talked for a lot longer than I wanted to, but here we go. I think I got everything else I wanted to say, so I appreciate that, and have a good one.